Welcome back to All Sides. I'm your host, Ann Fisher. You've probably heard of quiet quitting, where an employee does not go above and beyond the call of duty or their job description, and sometimes even falling short, performing just enough work to check the boxes at evaluation time. Now the latest buzz phrase is quiet hiring. George Nagle is a former global executive and author of a series of books centered around strategy, culture engagement, and creative innovation and productivity. Welcome to the show.
And thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Quiet hiring isn't new. It's kind of as old as time. You see somebody, to the left of you, to the right of you, and they're showing signs of maybe being able to move up the food chain. So you start promoting them, right?
So that's how one class of people will view it, right? In the progressive world, that's actually a positive for not only the employer, but the employees when it's done deliberately, right? We call it succession planning, right? There's a reason that we actually plan for it. The other side of quiet hiring can be when people are just getting robbed from one department to go fill in for another department because the prioritization of upper management has suddenly changed. And now they recognize that they're in a lull and they're not going to be able to hire somebody for 9 to 12 months given their current practices.
What does that mean, given their current practices?
Right. So the average right now for hiring is estimated for anybody above entry level to be a 9-month process from the time that they kick it off until they get somebody in the door. If your prioritization for a given year has suddenly shifted, well, that's 3/4 of the year. You're certainly not going to be able to hit that goal if it takes you that long to bring somebody in. So the easier route is to get somebody that's pretty close already internally to what you're looking to do and bring them in from a different department and have them work on that role. But that has a lot of consequences that tend to be really negative for a company.
So let's talk about what's the biggest negative on that score.
The biggest negative is systems build systems and companies build on systems and then they build on patches for systems. So that means, people typically, and this is where quiet quitting really became a thing, are already running at full tilt, right? Their plates are already full. That means all of the other business entities or departments are relying on them to do something. So if you take somebody, and I'll give an example, out of the marketing group and suddenly put them into sales, well, who's doing what that person was doing in marketing? The rest of the marketing department that's already full? Probably not. It's going to fall off and fall between the cracks. And I can tell you the people that tend to get pulled tend to be the most flexible, the most adaptable. They tend to be the harder workers. And they're the ones that have all of those little nuances that they know that nobody else knows about. It's what keeps the ship afloat. And if you don't have that, you're going to start springing some holes.
Right. I see the benefit they bring to the next chapter is a benefit that's lost in the previous.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same analogy of, people that unfortunately, and this is quite common, that live off of their credit cards, right? They're robbing Peter to pay Paul. They don't have a plan beyond the immediate on how they're going to actually get out of that debt or what's going to fall off in order to fulfill that debt. The same thing happens in businesses when we don't prioritize and then more importantly, and communicate this is the priorities that are coming, because most companies don't do that. They just say, hey, Ann, I need you to come fill in this position. It'll only be a couple weeks and it turns into a couple years.
Mm-hmm. What else? What are some other downsides?
Well, the biggest secondary downside would really come from crushing people's creativity. So if you are now running full tilt to drive something that has become a sudden prioritization, I like to call it chasing the shiny new thing. If you're chasing that and that's all that you're focused on, you don't take the time, because you're running full tilt, to take a step back and say, how can I think about this problem differently? How can I approach it in an innovative way that may actually solve not only the immediate prioritization need, but also be able to help push the company into a better position for the position I just left?
Well, I'm just wondering, these kind of things, these sort of seem like, from a non-HR point of view, to be HR 101. And I'm wondering if the pandemic and all of the change that's been brought about because of that has forced human resources to be more thoughtful than they had to be before.
I would say that it actually lessened some of their thoughtfulness past the initial onslaught of what are we going to do when half of our workforce is office workforce and we can't bring them in. I'm not talking about obviously the manufacturing teams, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's lessened that because people's natural adaptability came into play. And here's the fun part. When everybody had to adapt, they did it well because they knew the prioritization was just make your job work. Now, what happens when you figured out a way to do that and you and one of your coworkers is suddenly pulled to a completely different team and expected to perform at the level that you're just performing at? And this often happens, that old department, they're going to still ask you for things. Right? And it's always the big things. And it's always the things that are so big that if you don't do them, it may shut the entire department down or the company. Because if it's HR and it's somebody moving from payroll over to accounts receivable, and that happens quite a bit because it's all the money stuff, right? Everybody wants to get paid. We can't just be stealing people from payroll.
So you have to be more, I mean, I guess the question is then to what extent you have to be more thoughtful about who you decide to move around now, because they could move away because they don't feel like moving around. And also you're taking a strong link out of another department that without thinking about how you're going to replace that energy.
Correct. I mean, that is what it comes down to, is the missing link. I like that term. And if you don't have a way to replace that link or strengthen it, the chain's going to break. And it usually breaks in ways we don't normally anticipate, and sometimes we can't even anticipate it.
You know, my last guest, Emily Rose McCrae from Gartner HR Practice, I thought made an interesting point about the sort of proxy requirements that businesses have for hiring. Like they don't want to go through a bunch of resumes. They immediately screen out anybody without the MBA or whatever it might be, instead of thinking about what do I really want, and kind of broadening the search to maybe people who are very experienced on their team already but don't have the the degree or the specialized certification, and maybe they could go out and get it, but they kind of look away from them instead of hiring them or promoting them for their experience.
Right. Well, so there's two things into that, right? So if it's a promotion, I would hope that it's actually thought out and they've actually planned for that. And I can tell you the companies that are the most creative, the most innovative, they plan deliberately for succession. Like it's not even a question, so that when things like this come up, right? If I were being promoted or considered to be the next VP and a new division just suddenly started and we need somebody to direct it. Okay, maybe that's a really good stepping point for me, but there's already a succession, not only for me to move up, but for somebody to fill in my position. And then you get down to the entry level, which tends to not always be so mission critical, and you're filling that position. That's the backfill. Okay, that's a good plan, right? Because now it's been thought out, as you were alluding to.
Mm-hmm.
But when companies are automatically setting these screens and they're eliminating people, that's where their process really gets in the way. And I'm going to tell you, and I know we're in a tight economy, but if you have a prioritization that's requiring you to quiet hire within your team, and your belief, and it's a belief, is that you have a 9 to 12 month hiring process, why don't you double the salary and see how fast you fill it? And I know most companies will say, well, we can't do that. We can't afford it. Then my immediate pushback to that is, well, how big of a priority is it really that you're about to cause this dynamic change in your organization without communicating it clearly and allowing people to have a strategy to fulfill what they're doing now?
Right. So therein lies the issue of quiet. Why not make it public and say, we're looking for this? That's Who right. among you is interested? And here's the carrot.
That's correct. I'm all about, that cultural engagement, that communication, especially of strategy. I can tell you the companies that are very deliberate in how they communicate their strategy, and they keep it to really 3 talking points, and that's all you ever hear from upper management are those 3 talking points, they don't have these problems with quiet hiring. They have problems of bringing in enough entry-level people to actually be able to move forward with the next prioritization that comes up, because everybody already knows the plan and they buy into the plan because they want it too.
Let's see. Emma in Delaware, you're on the air. Hi, Emma.
Good morning. Hey, so I just recently have experienced a situation where one of our most talented, managers was really doing a ton of really good work, a lot of high-profile projects, and then there was another round of promotions, and this individual did not get promoted. And other people who did get promoted were not working on any of these high-profile projects that were quite successful. So I talked amongst my own colleagues, and we're all like, well, why should the rest of us even bother if the most, the most successful person amongst us is not getting promoted? Do you ever see that kind of scenario and how that crushes the spirit?
Interesting. Thank you, Emma.
So, Emma, that's a fantastic point. And what I heard, right, from my experience, is that person was doing such a bang-up job on those top priorities that the company said, we can't afford to move them out because we know we don't have somebody that's going to come in and sustain those top priorities and those top projects like this person is. And that happens quite often, unfortunately, where people are especially made to believe that they have this next thing and it just goes away because they're doing too good of a job in it. That's called bad planning by management.
And that's a morale problem at that point.
It absolutely is, yes.
Well, George Nagle, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
And great conversation. Thank you so much.
George Nagle is a former global executive and author of a series of books centered around strategy, culture, and business culture engagement, creative innovation, and productivity. We'll have a link to his website at wosu.org/allsides. That's it for now. Thank you so much for joining us. This is All Sides with Ann Fisher on 89.7 NPR News.